Hey guys, how are you doing? I'm good, thank you so much for asking. So my last couple of videos have been about movies. I did one on Green Book, I did one on The Help, and underneath both of those movies, y'all have been suggesting other movies for me to watch and review, and I wanted to watch newer movies because I don't make it out to the movies as much as I should. Y'all suggested Black Klansman, which I tried and failed to make it through. Y'all also suggested If Beale Street Could Talk by Barry Jenkins, and wow, thank you so much. This was such a good movie. It was so good that I am a little bit confused about why we didn't hear about Beale Street more during this award season, why it wasn't nominated for, I could easily see it being nominated for Best Picture, Best Director, but at the very least, Best Adapted Screenplay. I just found that to be weird, especially because it won other awards, smaller awards. It won Best Feature at the Spirit Awards, which is like the independent movie award. So I just wonder why it got shut out. I wonder if it was like, oh, we already gave that young Black director his things last year. Let's get into why I enjoyed this movie so much. It wasn't a 10 out of 10 for me, but it was a 9 out of 10, an 8.5 to 9 out of 10, and that's good. That's really good. So first, let's talk about the filmmaking. I've talked in previous videos about how important opening scenes are to me. Opening scenes tell us what directors want us to focus on. They're telling us in their opening scenes what's important, what should we invest ourselves in. And in the opening scene of this movie, we zoom in on Tish and Fonnie, obviously, but what is so striking to me is how much time we spend on their faces. Barry Jenkins in this movie spent so much time just looking at these beautiful Black faces and having us stare into their eyes and having them stare back at us with their beautiful clear skin, and he is imploring us in all of this time spent lingering on these people's faces to explore the topography of their faces, the geography of their faces. That's what we are holding on to for so much of this film, and I find that to be so moving. It was so intimate sometimes when we're looking at them looking at each other and looking at them looking at us. Like, sometimes I felt like I have to look away. It's too much. But that's what made it so moving. I loved Tish and Fonnie's love, and I loved the way that Barry Jenkins conveyed that love. Every time we see Tish and Fonnie, it's like we're in a dream. It's like they're floating through space, things get blurry, it really feels ethereal. There is not in this film a fidelity to realism. And if you've ever been in love, which we all have, hopefully, it really felt like, on screen, it looked like the way that love feels when Tish and Fonnie are together. They're just holding hands, moving through life, even though their lives are pretty shitty, and everything else melts away. It's a dream sequence. This film is beautiful. It's like every frame is a painting. James Laxton is the director of photography, and that's a white man who does such a great job at capturing the diversity of brown skin. I recently saw a talk given by Kerry James Marshall, and if you don't know him, he is this painter who paints Black folks, but paints them like Black. He was talking about how he goes out of his way to show that all Black, I mean, like literally this color, this kind of Black, there are lots of different Blacks. So he'll have a dark Black and a medium Black and a light Black, but they're all Blacks, but they're different shades. But we have been socialized to think that all Black is the same. It's just Black. It's just, but Kerry James Marshall and his work says, no, there's a gradient of Black, and I'm gonna show you the gradient. And for so long in film and in photography, Black people have gotten the short end of the stick with regards to how our complexions are portrayed on screen. And so we're overexposed, we're underexposed, we're too flat. James Laxton and Barry Jenkins do such a good job of just showing the diversity of hues. There are a few scenes in this film where there is 6, 7, 8 black people sitting around in a room, and you see the sheen of all of these beautiful brown skin tones, and it's rich and it's deep, and every single time there's a scene with all of these characters in it and you just see them split so beautifully, you're like, oh, we don't get that. One, we don't get it because there's 1 or 2 token black characters, and 2, we don't get it because the DPs and the directors are just not skilled enough to give it to us. It is such a relief as a black person to just watch a movie and be transfixed by how beautiful everybody is. How beautiful everybody, I mean, it feels good. I welled up in tears a couple of times during this film. It was always when there was score. The score of this movie is so beautiful. Nicholas Bertel did such a beautiful job every single time. When Trish and Fonnie were gonna do it for the first time and that score wells up, I'm not even sentimental like that, but I felt emotional. There were other times during the film where you're already in a high stakes moment, a high emotional moment, and then that score comes in. Oh my God, it was perfect. And then I learned that the different parts of the score are named for different kinds of love, except for the parts of the score that have to deal with the police. Oh my God, it's such a beautiful choice. After I finished watching this movie, I thought to myself, oh, that's advanced filmmaking. That's not 101. That is graduate school level. And maybe that's the difference that going to film school makes. But so many parts of this film came together in the perfect way to make a beautiful whole. There are different even color patinas on the shots to give it different moods. Sometimes it's gold, sometimes it's red. The bokeh, right? The blurred backgrounds that makes us feel like we're floating in a different world, but also we're still very much grounded in the racist United States. It's so on another level. Give that man a Genius Grant. The technical aspects of this film are so good. They're so next level. The way that the camera moves is beautiful. The way that the focus shifts. What really makes this film exceptional is how much heart and soul is in it. We see so clearly that Barry Jenkins is a hopeless romantic. This man loves love. Love is dripping in every single shot of this movie. Barry Jenkins has made some mixed CDs in his day, okay? He's made some mixed CDs for ya. He's made you a Spotify playlist. He just seems like that kind of man. I'm talking like I'm in love with him. Like I'm trying to dig him. I'm not. But I do love his work. Now let's talk about the actual plot of the movie. If Beale Street Could Talk is based on a novel by the incomparable James Baldwin. Now, there are quite a few liberties taken with the novel. I wasn't offended by them. But if you're somebody who feels like an adaptation needs to be very, very straight on with the book, there's a little, there's some differences. There are some differences, but I think he made the right choices. Obviously, this film is about the main characters, Tish and Fonnie, who fall in love in Harlem in the early 70s, early to mid 70s. But obviously, times aren't ever good for black people in this country, so their lives are pretty bad. Fonnie is wrongly accused of rape, and then Tish gets pregnant, and everything is bad. Everything is really bad. What is so unusual about this film, and I think it didn't help it when it comes to mainstream film recognition, is that this film is coming from the perspective of a young black woman. I love that 19-year-old Tish is narrating the majority of this film. We don't see it. The last movie like this that I loved as much as this, that was narrated by a black girl or a black woman, maybe was Crooklyn. Crooklyn came out like 20 years ago, so I must be missing something. But it's very, very rare, and I appreciated it. So I said before that Barry Jenkins loves love. There's love dripping out of this movie. It felt so good to see such tenderness on screen. The tenderness in Tish's family toward her, that early scene where Tish tells her mother that she's pregnant, and then her mother tells the family that she's pregnant, and the way that they rally around her, just, it was so moving to me. And there's the part where, oh, okay, let's talk about the actress real quick. Regina Ben King, Coleman Domingo, who plays Joseph, Tish's father. Who is him? Where did he come from? I love him. Tiana Paris, we already know and love Tiana Paris. When Tish reveals to her family that she's pregnant and she's young and she's not married and she's expecting them to be judgmental, their reactions to her, the way that that scene was played, when Ernestine tells Tish, unbow your head, good to see black women enveloped in love in that way. And I already talked about the way that Tish and Fonny are depicted. Like, if you've ever been in love, hopefully you have, you know, especially in the early days when you start dating somebody or when you're falling in love with somebody, it really is like the movies. It's like, it's just y'all, and y'all are walking down the street and everything else is blurred. It's like The Wizard of Oz when the world is in black and white and you guys are in Technicolor. Everything is it's just y'all floating on clouds. That's what we really saw captured in this film. And the way that they interacted was so pure and tender. It was passionate and romantic and sometimes erotic. It was never lewd. One thing that was hinted at in this movie but wasn't really explored the way that Baldwin explored it in the book. Of course, I mean, you only got 2 hours, so what are you gonna do in 2 hours? But what was hinted at was the class and respectability divide in black communities. And even though Fonny's family, I mean, clearly everybody in this movie is working class. Nobody is the King of England in this movie. But Fonny's family, particularly Mrs. Hunt, his mother, and the sisters, they operate under a different system of respectability, and they're religious, and that causes clashes with Tish's family. We did not, unfortunately, get to explore the colorism that is such a big theme in the book, but it's kind of hinted at, but you can't really do it in this movie because Fonny is brown. He's brown like me, so what are you gonna do? Mrs. Hunt is brown. She brown like me, so you can't really do it. The sisters were a little bit lighter, but really they were just uppity and they wore their hair straight and they wore cute little dresses and little fake Chanel suits. I do think we lose something by doing away with that colorism aspect, but it's okay. I'm okay. I still loved it, and I loved Fonny so much that, and I'm not mad. Look, we need to talk about how fine Stephen James is. It's an emergency. He is so attractive in this movie and out of this movie. That's a fine man. In that big scene with the Hunts, there is a moment that is true to the text where Fonny's father hits his mother. And I did not know how to feel. I wasn't sure what I was supposed to feel at that moment. I feel like maybe we could have cut it out. Because things are just different. This book was published in 1974. We're not in the same place. It made me feel, I don't want to feel for Mrs. Hunt. And I'm not even sure if I'm supposed to feel for Mrs. Hunt. Or maybe I am supposed to feel for Mrs. Hunt. Maybe the point is that we black women cling on to religiosity because we're just looking for something. We're just looking for something to hold on to. And yeah, maybe that fervent religiosity hurts us and it hurts the people that we love, and it inspires frustration and anger in the people in our families and the people that we love, but we're clinging on to it because we need something. The world is not giving us anything. So maybe that's why I was supposed to feel for Mrs. Hunt, but you know, I just don't ever want to see anybody being hit on screen. Do you remember that Tyler Perry movie? I don't remember which one it was, when somebody hits their wife. Anyways, nobody's just a pure villain. There's no villains and there are no heroes. Everybody is complicated. I wrote down in my notes, who hasn't fallen for the come check out my apartment scam? Y'all know what I'm talking about. We've got to talk about Brian Tyree Henry. I'm so confused about why overall this movie didn't get more awards love, but I am outright pissed off that Brian Tyree Henry did not win awards for this. Those 10-15 minutes that he's in this film, I think actually it's about 12 minutes to be exact, those were the best 12 minutes of this movie in a good movie. The way that it evolves from I'm carefree and everything's cool, and the way that he slowly peels off the layers of that emotional onion and opens up to Fonny. When he's talking about the abuse that he's experienced in prison, it's not explicitly stated, but he alludes to abuse that he's experienced in prison and the difficulties that he's experienced and the way that he was set up, and how he's grateful that he was set up, but he could have been set up in a much more egregious way. The journey that Brian Tyree Henry took us on, and that's another point where the way that the camera moves from Daniel's face to Fonny's face in that fluid motion, the way that the score comes in under him while they're talking, whoo, what a good scene, you guys. That should have won Best Supporting Actor in every single awards over Mahershala Ali, I believe. I think the fact that he wasn't recognized more is offensive. I like a story where the police are villains because that is true life. What really took me out of BlacKkKlansman, if we're gonna be perfectly honest, is the idea that I have to root for the police officer. I'm sorry, I can't do it. Not in 2019. It's not for me. We see in this film what the police really are, and we also get to see other people figure out what the police are, like Fonny's lawyer, when he's realizing, oh, this is not going to be a fair process. Tish is pregnant in this film. We've been having this larger cultural conversation about maternal mortality rates in the United States and the fact that we lag behind every developed nation, the fact that maternal mortality rates are actually climbing instead of decreasing for the first time in American history, and the stress that Tish was going throughout her pregnancy just brought all of that stuff that we've been talking about to the forefront of my mind. All of the toxic stress that she had to endure while she was pregnant with this little baby because of an unjust system, because of poverty. They have to try to pay to fight this unjust system. It is just so, it makes so visible this thing that sometimes feels abstract. I loved in this film how we see jail wear on Fonny. We are not endlessly resilient. He comes in with a little glint in his eye, thinking maybe things will be okay. So does Tish, thinking maybe things will be okay, and they're laughing and they're chuckling. And by the end of this movie, when it's very clear that things are not going to be okay, we see him physically beaten up. Those final scenes, he has physical scars, but he's just beaten down. He's worn down, you know? Despite the fact that this movie looks like a dream, it just looks so beautiful. We need the beauty of this film to offset the fact that shit is tragic. It is horrible. People are suffering. I appreciated the juxtaposition of this horrible injustice, of this suffering, with beautiful aesthetics. So let's get to the acting. Regina King deserved that award. She really won that Oscar for those scenes in Puerto Rico. There's a couple of different scenes. One is where she's putting on the wig and taking off the wig. We see a woman's internal monologue perfectly expressed. Oh, so freaking good. And then when she confronts the woman who falsely accused Fonnie of rape, and some of that dialogue is a little wonky. You know, James Baldwin is a little wonky sometimes. That scene with, I think her name is Victoria. I always get people's names wrong. I'm so notorious for that. Victoria and Sharon in Puerto Rico. And then when Victoria kind of collapses and it's just Sharon working through her emotions and her frustration and her sadness. This is my one critique, but it's a major critique of this movie, is I didn't love Kiki Lane. And I think she's so beautiful. I think she's so freaking gorgeous. That freaking face. Okay, I could just look at that face all day. She reminds me of Cicely Tyson sometimes in this movie, but I just felt like I needed a little bit more from her to carry this movie. I liked the sweetness that she brought to the character. She was very believable as a 19-year-old woman, and I think now she's 27. But I just needed something more to hold on to. And because Tish is such a big part of this film, the fact that that character isn't grabbing me the way that I needed to be grabbed, the film doesn't reach the heights that I think it could have. Painfully Pretty, just a little too girlish, a little flat. Obviously, when I watch these movies, I'm watching for just the technical craft of filmmaking that I love so much. But if you're gonna tackle James Baldwin, you better get the messaging right. You better get the themes right. And I think Barry Jenkins did such a good job because not only is the director, but he wrote the screenplay. One of the themes I appreciated was trying to find that balance between the terrible and the sublime. This movie is a struggle movie from beginning to end. It's poverty, it's misery, it's police misconduct, it's prison industrial complex. It would be very easy to get bogged down by that. But as viewers, we get some respite from that because it looks so good. He rounds off those corners for us by giving us gorgeous visuals. And I saw a review that said maybe he did a little bit too much shaving, right? Made it a little bit too beautiful. But I appreciate that because I do think that a central part of the Black experience is finding the sublime in a sty full of shit. One thing that this movie did make me thankful about is, as bad as things are now, would I want to be a teenager in the 70s? No, I'm good, thank you so much. An essential component of Black survival in the United States is looking around and saying, wow, this is terrible, but we're going to make it as good as we can for as long as we can. And that was really captured in this film. Another thing that I loved about this film is how important connection is to everyone in it. If you don't have any material wealth, if you don't have money, if you live in a crappy apartment, if you work a terrible job, if you don't have any real positive life prospects, at least you have your connection to your friends and your family. The joy that we see when Daniel and Fonnie link up again, there is a shot of them just grinning in Fonnie's apartment. Like, these men live horrible lives and they're just grinning because at least they've reconnected. And what Tish underscores in her narration is she can't be mad that Daniel just shows up out of nowhere and wants to eat her food, because Daniel is a critical point of connection for Fonnie. And Tish has her family. She has her sister that doesn't give up on her. She has her mother that's going to go to the ends of the earth, to Puerto Rico, to exonerate her husband-to-be. She has her father and her father-in-law who are willing to scheme and boost and thieve in order to come together for Fonny. I mean, that is why we're still here. You know, if you're a black person in the United States, you're here because you got some family who looked out for you, because you have friends who looked out for you, because you have mentors or church members or whatever that are rooting you in your community. Another thing I loved is that the specter of hopelessness really hovers around in this movie. It's bad, but somehow they consistently resist hopelessness. They resist nihilism. They are determined to live to see another day. We also see in this movie how racism stunts black creativity. Who knows what kind of brilliant artist Fonny could have or should have been. Fonny did not get an opportunity to explore his creativity, to explore his natural gifts. That was stolen from him. His freedom, his literal physical freedom, was stolen from him, and his freedom via his artistry, his art practice, was stolen from him as well. And that, again, is another reality for so many of us. Maybe we're not physically imprisoned, but we're imprisoned by capitalism, right? We can't pursue our art, we can't pursue our talent or our passion because we gotta pay bills. That's a real thing, and I think that, of course, is a theme that Baldwin related to really intimately. There is a scene in this film where it cuts between Fonny in his little basement apartment making his art, making his sculptures, and the shot goes between that and him in his jail cell. He's laying there thinking about creating and making things, and he is imprisoned in multiple ways. I like that this movie is a sad movie. I like that it ends sadly. I think it probably did not get the love that it should have gotten because this is a movie about race and systemic injustice and inequality, and it ends sadly. It's not a Green Book with a fake happy ending. It doesn't make the police the heroes. This is a real movie about poor black people who are crushed by an unjust system, and they don't magically get out of it. There's no deus ex machina. I also love that this movie underscores that incarceration is not just about the person who is imprisoned. We talk a lot about how if you're jailed, you know, I don't believe in prison, if you're jailed, then your life chances are ruined for the rest of your life. But if you're jailed, then your family also suffers, your children also suffer. The consequences of an unjust prison system are not confined to the person who is actually locked up. Sharon, Tish's mom, is kind of the bright light in this movie. She gives us the happier lines. She tells Tish that suffering doesn't last forever, but by the end of this movie, you're like, does it? You know, does suffering end? Because it seems like it's lasting forever. She also says that love is all you need, and you're like, is love all you need? Ultimately, this film ends on a terribly depressing note. It could have been much more depressing. The book is much more depressing than this movie, I think. But it's still, we don't get warm fuzzies, okay? This is not Don Shirley and Tony becoming BFF. Overall, this was a really, really good movie. It deserved much more than it got. I am mad. This movie was robbed, not only because Brian Tyree Henry wasn't nominated for Best Supporting Actor, which he absolutely should have been, but the filmmaking of this movie was just better for me, stylistically, technically, than a few of the movies that won big awards. I really think it is because this movie does, more than the other movies about race that were big this year, talk about racism the way that it actually is and not the way that we wish it were. Even if this movie is set 35, 40 years ago, we're not that far removed from it. There are who knows how many people who are languishing in prison because of a dirty cop. There are how many people who are suffering inordinately because they are poor. We have not done what we need to do to move past that. And this is a really uncomfortable reminder of that. So if you want to feel good, you're not gonna get that at the end of If Beale Street Could Talk. What you're gonna get is breathtaking beauty. What you're gonna get is gorgeous brown skin. But you're not gonna get, oh, well, racism is over. I highly encourage you to watch it. I can't talk about how I watched this film because I'm not sure if it's out on DVD yet. Anyways, that's all I have to say about that. Thank you guys so much for watching. I think I'm a Barry Jenkins stan now. I just was so moved by this. I was really, really moved, you know? And I'm a crybaby. I love to cry, but I'm also not easily impressed. So he did it. Loved it. Well, that's all I have to say about that. Thank you guys so much for watching. Over on Patreon, I made a companion video about why I no longer trust men who describe themselves as feminists and womanists. I tell a crazy 100% true story with names redacted about why I am now giving any man, particularly if you're straight, a side eye if you just lead with your feminist or womanist identity. I'm side-eyeing you. I'm sorry, I don't trust it. So obviously that is over on Patreon. It's patrons only. Thank you guys so much for the support over there. Send me an email, leave a comment, private message me if you can figure out how to do that. Buy some merch, sign up for the email newsletter. Thank you guys so much. I'll see you next time.